Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sukkah. We are up to Perek Aleph, Mishnah Hey. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. The Mishnah begins, Havile Kash v'Havile Etzim v'Havile Zradin, bundles of straw, bundles of wood, and bundles of cane, which the Rav explains refers to a type of cane that is fed to animals when moist and is used as firewood when dry, and misakichin bahen may not be used as schach. Although straw, wood, and cane are biblically fit for schach because they grow from the ground and cannot become tameh, the rabbis decree that they are invalid when tied in bundles. Now, they cannot become tameh from the Torah because they are unfit for people to eat and they have not been made into utensils. Like we mentioned, only people, food, drink, clothing, and utensils are susceptible to tumah. However, the rabbis decree that they are invalid when tied in bundles. And the commentaries explain that to understand this rabbinic decree, two concepts must be introduced. A, even proper schach materials cannot be used as schach unless one put them on the sukkah with intent that they will provide shade from the sun or some other form of protection. If one put them there for a different purpose, they are invalid. Although the halacha follows Bet Hillel, who hold that intent for the mitzvah is not necessary, like we learned in Mishnah 1, one must at least have intent for shade or other protection, because schach is defined as a covering that was put in place to provide shade. Anything put in place for some other purpose cannot be called schach. And B, the Torah requires that schach be valid when it is constructed. If it was invalid at that time, it cannot be fixed later merely by removing the disqualifying factor. Rather, one must reconstruct it in a valid manner from scratch, for example, by picking it up and then putting it down. Our Mishnah states that bundles of straw, wood, and cane may not be used as schach, even though these are valid schach materials. And the reason is as follows. Bundles of straw, wood, and cane were often left out in the sun to dry so that they can be used as firewood. If a person puts such bundles on a sukkah to dry, they are unfit for schach because one must construct schach with the intent that it will provide shade. Even if he then changed his mind and decided to use them as schach, they remain invalid because schach must be valid at the moment it is put in place. Now the rabbis were concerned that someone might put bundles of wood, straw, or cane on his sukkah to dry, and then change his mind and decide to leave them there for schach. So to prevent people from using such schach, which is biblically invalid, the rabbis decreed that bundles of wood, straw, or cane may not be used at all, even if one put them on the sukkah for the correct purpose, such as providing shade in the first place. V'chulan shetiran ksherot. However, any of these bundles that one untied is valid, and the commentaries explain the decree applies only to bundles. Once they have been untied and are no longer bundles, they are fit to be used as schach. Now, one may untie the bundles even after they were put on the sukkah, provided that they were originally placed there to give protection, in which case the disqualification is merely rabbinic. If one had put them on the sukkah to dry out, and therefore their disqualification is biblical, merely untying them is not enough. Rather, one must remake the schach by moving them from one place to another on the sukkah, or by picking them up and putting them down, as Maran discusses in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, chapter 629, halakha 17. Now, referring to every invalid item mentioned in the previous Mishnahs, which this includes materials that do not grow from the ground, plants that are still attached to the ground, items that can become tameh, as well as bundles of wood, straw, and cane. It also includes the boards discussed in the next Mishnah. The Tana teaches v'chulan ksherot adifanot. However, all of them are valid for the walls of a sukkah. They are invalid only for schach. The word sukkah, the Rav explains in the Torah, refers to the schach rather than the walls. And that is in a Mishnah Hey. Mishnah Vav now continues, a house cannot be used as a sukkah, even if its roof is made of materials fit for schach, because the Torah tells us to dwell in a sukkah, a structure built mainly to provide shade, which excludes the house in which one lives the rest of the year. Now, since the roof of a house is built for all the needs of a year-round residence, it is invalid for schach, which is defined as a covering that primarily provides shade. In the times of the Mishnah, the roofs of houses were often made of wide wooden beams. Now, plain wooden beams are biblically fit for use as schach, because they cannot become tameh, being neither food or utensils, and they consist of material that grows from the ground. The rabbis therefore decreed that wide beams or boards are invalid for schach, because if they would be permitted, a person might think that just as he can fulfill the mitzvah by sitting under wide beams in a sukkah, so can he fulfill the mitzvah by sitting under the beams of his house. Because again, in the times of the Mishnah, the roofs of houses were often made of wide wooden beams. Now the Mishnah cites a dispute as to how wide a board must be in order to be invalid. The Mishnah begins, Mitzakechin bin sarim. We may use boards narrower than 4 tefachim as schach, because only boards that are 4 tefachim wide might be compared to the beams of a roof. Now, an area that is 4 tefachim wide is considered significant, the Rav says, in many areas of Jewish law. Therefore, beams of schach that are 4 tefachim wide are quite likely to be compared to the beams of a regular roof. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Meir oser, but Rabbi Meir forbids even boards that are narrower than 4 tefachim, because they too might be compared to the beams of a roof. However, the Rav says even Rabbi Meir agrees that beams narrower than 3 tefachim are acceptable, because they are merely sticks, which would certainly not be compared to the beams on the roof of a house. Now, Rabbi Meir draws the line at 3 tefachim because the rule of Lavud, which states that narrow gaps are considered closed, applies only to gaps narrower than 3 tefachim. Since a width of 3 tefachim is too wide for lavud, a beam of that width would be viewed as more than just a stick. And the Rav does tell us, V'halacha Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that we may use boards narrower than 4 tefachim as schach, all the more so 3. But even in the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda says we can use boards that are narrower than 4 tefachim as schach, and that is the halacha. Now, the Mishnah states the law in a case where a board that is 4 tefachim wide, which everyone agrees is invalid. We said the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda was it has to be boards that are narrower than 4 tefachim. So the Mishnah is going to talk about the law in a case where a board that is 4 tefachim wide, which everyone agrees is invalid, was placed on top of a sukkah alongside a wall, between the wall and the valid schach. If one put a board that is 4 tefachim wide on a sukkah alongside a wall, the sukkah is valid because the board is not wide enough to separate the wall from the sukkah. Now, if there is a wide gap between the schach of a sukkah and one of its walls, that wall is not considered part of the sukkah. Therefore, if just 3 walls surround the sukkah, the entire sukkah is disqualified, since only 2 of the walls are halachically connected to it. A sukkah needs at least 3 walls, like we went to Mishnah 1. Our Mishnah teaches, however, that if a 4 tefach wide board lies between the valid schach of a sukkah and a wall, it does not separate the wall from the sukkah. Rather, that wall remains attached to the sukkah and can be counted as one of the 3 required walls. This law is based on the rule of dofen akuma, bent wall, which states that if a strip of invalid schach lies within 4 amot of a wall, the wall is viewed as bending at the top and extending all the way to the valid part of the schach. Although the Mishnah says that the rest of the sukkah is valid, that is true only where the remaining schach covers an area of at least 7 by 7 tefachim, which is the minimum size of a sukkah. Whoever can see the diagram brought down in note 5 in the article elucidated. The Mishnah says, "Ubilvad shlo yishan tachtav." However, one may not sleep under the board. Although the rest of the sukkah is valid, the area directly below the board is not. Therefore, one who sleeps there does not fulfill the mitzvah. Now, an area that is 4 tefachim wide can be regarded as an area in its own right, independent from its surroundings. Therefore, even though most of the sukkah is valid, the area under the board is excluded. Now, although the Mishnah mentions only sleeping under the board, it is also forbidden to eat there or do any other activities that requires a sukkah. The Mishnah specifies sleeping because it is forbidden to take even a short nap outside a sukkah, but a small snack is permitted. Since it is easier to transgress the prohibition by means of sleeping than by means of any other activity, the Mishnah specifically warns against sleeping under the board. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.